morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. The question is, we are in this hellhole. How the devil are we going to get out of it? I think it is a question that should preoccupy every Zimbabwean, because no one is going to get us out of this hole. We have to dig ourselves out of it. Ever since the country gained its independence, we are the masters of our own destiny. Whether we were ready for it or not, it's a question of you sink or you swim. And after 45 years of independence, one cannot deny that we are sinking. The nation is a failed state. Millions of our people are living in abject poverty. That is the reality. This afternoon, I would like to address the issue of what should be the way forward. What is it we can really do in the next 3 years up to 2028? 2028 is an important year because during elections is the best option, the best opportunity for a nation to change, to achieve meaningful change. The question then is that in 2028, the nation will be going to hold its elections. Can we expect any meaningful change after that election? That's why the 3 years comes in. So in this particular case, I would like to approach this issue and answer a few of the following questions. What is a rational Zimbabwean political plan for the next 3 years? What are the traps that we must avoid? And what are the realistic goals we can set for ourselves? What would be plan A, plan B, and plan C? I think, and I firmly believe in the maxim that those who fail to plan, plan to fail. So let's look at the first question. What is Zimbabwe's plan out of this political mess? In my view, we have had elections for the last 45 years. And none of those elections were free, fair, and credible. Zimbabwe is a failed state precisely because we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. So the plan for Zimbabwe has to be, we must end this case of rigged elections and bad governance. The right to a meaningful vote is more than a right. It is the essence of good governance. And God knows, after 45 years of this corrupt, tyrannical Zanu PF dictatorship, we desperately need to cure ourselves of this case of rigged elections and bad governance. So the plan has to be, we must end the case of rigged elections. Now we can look at what is it we can realistically do. Some of the problems, the traps we will encounter along this line is history repeating itself. We have had 45 years of rigged elections. And in essence, we have had 45 years of history repeating itself. We have participated in flawed elections to give Zanu PF political legitimacy. So the biggest danger here is to fall into this trap of thinking that we have got a solution when in reality we do not have a solution. This is particularly relevant in the case of Zimbabweans out there. We have been conned by MDC-CCC to participate in flawed elections because they believed the lie that MDC-CCC can win rigged elections. We have got to avoid that. Each year since the 2008-2013 GNU debacle, every time CCC MDC leaders have promised one idiotic promise after another. And we, the people, have fallen for it. They have promised at this time they will win the elections because we've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, for instance. And then you find, no, they haven't. And so we've fallen for it. The other thing that we have got to realize here is that we must learn to distinguish between what we can do and what we cannot do. The number one thing that people have risked their very lives this last 45 years, well, 25 years, if we look at the election of the MDC guys, is that we had elected those guys to implement the democratic reforms. The primary purpose was to implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging elections. In other countries, the opposition have other purposes. In Zimbabwe, that was the primary purpose. And these guys had the golden opportunity to implement those reforms during the 2008 to 2013 GNU. They failed to implement even one token reform. The danger we have here is that many of our people still believe that the opposition are the nation's best foot forward. And so accepting that the opposition have sold out is absolutely critically important if we're ever going to move forward. Because that is the truth. They did not implement even one token reform. Indeed, ever since the GNU, the opposition have conned people to participate in flawed elections, giving Zanu PF legitimacy and perpetuating the nation's suffering. Accepting that is the number one challenge that the people of Zimbabwe are facing today. So in my view, the number one task in the next 3 years has to be educating the ordinary Zimbabweans out there to accept that the present MDC-CCC leadership have sold out. If the people don't accept that, they will easily be conned to participate in the flawed elections and perpetuate the dictatorship. And we are back to square one. So the number one task is persuading people to realize that MDC-CCC are not offering any solutions. What are the solutions? The solution at the present moment is we want the reforms to be implemented so that we have free, fair, and credible elections. That is the ideal solution. I say ideal because we are not going to implement any meaningful reforms in the remaining 3 years. Like I said, we have got to identify what we can do and cannot do. Getting any meaningful reforms implemented now is not possible. It just won't happen. To start with, Zanu PF, who have got control of government, will never implement any reforms. That is a fact. And the MDC guys are not going to implement any reforms either. And even if they were going to try, you cannot implement any meaningful reforms in 3 years and expect them to be put into practice and be effective in that 3 years. That will not happen. So what is it we can realistically achieve? Well, what we can realistically achieve is stopping Zanu PF having legitimacy. Stopping Zanu PF rigging the elections and getting away with it. How are we going to achieve that? If we stop Zanu PF, if we stop the opposition supporters participating in these flawed elections, Zanu PF will lose legitimacy. That point has got to be made and made repeatedly. This point, I must add, is not just me who have said it. The opposition leaders themselves have acknowledged it. On the bottom of your screen, I'm showing a quotation from David Coulthard's book stating that very fact. He noted that reality during the 2013 elections, that the election process was so flawed, so illegal, the only logical step was to withdraw. He explains, as you can see in the quotation, why he and his friends could not withdraw. They also knew that Zanu PF was giving a few gravy train seats to entice the opposition to participate. And it was that attracted them. So Zanu PF will hold these 2028 elections, and they will rig them. And for good reason. They want to stay in power. The opposition leaders will participate in those flawed elections, as they've done in the past repeatedly, because they know Zanu PF is giving away a few gravy train seats to entice them to participate. Some people make the mistake of thinking that, oh, we don't want the Zanu PF to have absolute majority. Zanu PF has learned since the GNU that legitimacy does not come from winning 98% of the votes, as happened in Tanzania 2 months ago. They have compromised and tried to create the impression that Zimbabwe is no longer a de facto one-party state, but a multi-party state, by allowing the opposition to win some seats. Mnangagwa has never won the presidential race, or rather rigged the presidential race to win by 98%. He's been content with winning with 52%, 2% of the votes. But anything to get him over the 52%, or rather the 50% plus 1, is all he needed. The Zanu PF supporters themselves, majority of them, and they come from the rural areas, they are coerced to vote for the party. They frog marched to attend the party's rallies. They frog marched to vote for the party. The electorate that we have to target here is the supporters of the opposition. The opposition has no coercive means. So most of these people support the opposition freely. And it should be noted here that most of the opposition supporters have 11 years of formal education, which would mean they've done 7 years primary, plus another 4 years of secondary school. They're Form 4. And many of them even hold university degrees. Many of them are professionals in their own right. And yet, these people are the ones that people like Chamisa have conned again and again to participate in flawed elections on the basis of an idiotic lie. How is it possible that somebody who has received that education would be so easily conned? Here is Chamisa telling his supporters that he was forming the cabinet because it was God's plan that Triple C wins the elections and forms the next government. This was just a few days before the 2023 elections.
Makorokoto Zimbabwe nokuti hakuna munhu anomira kana denga raronga plan. Denga raronga plan, denga harifoiri. Plan yaMwari haifoiri. Ini ndatanga kugadzira cabinet. There is no way we are not going to form a new cabinet. There is no way we are not going to have a celebration. There is no way we are not going to have an inauguration. Let's start preparing for our inauguration. Let's start preparing for our celebration.
Of course, he was lying. That was a blatant lie. Mnangagwa went on to blatantly rig those elections. SADC and the AU confirmed those elections were flawed. What is so disappointing here is that many of the opposition supporters still continue to participate in these flawed elections. Chamisa abandoned his party soon after the 2023 elections, claiming that it had been infiltrated by Zanu PF and he took a long political sabbatical. Of course, what really happened is he collected his 30 pieces of silver and walked away. We know that he knew those elections were flawed and that Zanu PF were rigging those elections, because he didn't even bother to deploy something as basic as vote election agencies at polling stations. Something that happens even in countries where they've had free, fair, and credible elections for donkey years. The various candidates will have a representative in the polling station to just make sure that everything is running smoothly. Chamisa had the money to pay those agents. He chose not to. And according to Chilton Wende here, he pocketed the money. So it comes back to the argument we were making earlier on, that the opposition supporters really have to open their eyes and their minds to the political reality in Zimbabwe. Why is it that they failed to see Nelson Chamisa and his MDC Triple C friends for who they really are? Zimbabwe will not be in this political mess if these supporters open their eyes. How somebody with at least 11 years of formal education can be so easily conned. It's a great disappointment. Why? beggars belief. And yet they are. If we are serious about getting change, that is the area we have to address. I cannot conclude my argument here without talking about this so-called ED2030 agenda. I believe ED2030 agenda is a hoax. Mnangagwa and his friends have thrown that in, knowing that many Zimbabweans would be like a dog if you throw a bone to a dog. Everything else is forgotten. It's paying attention to the bone. Thieves are known to play that dirty trick on dogs. Throw him a chunk of meat, the dog will forget that he is a guard dog. He'll forget that this individual here is a thief, the very person the dog is supposed to keep away, make sure they don't come in. 2030 is an argument that has been thrown in to draw the nation's attention away. If the truth be said, ED 2030 emerged soon after the 2023 elections. Mnangagwa did not want the nation to pay too much attention to the fact that he had rigged those elections. And so 2030 became a convenient diversion. Because while people were thinking of 2030, how is he going to achieve it? Is he going to amend the constitution, or is he going to just impose himself, or what? What is going to happen? While they're tussling with that, they've forgotten that Mnangagwa and his regime are indeed illegitimate. The other reason why I'm saying this is a decoy is that as much as many people would want to believe that those who pursue or try to stop this Mnangagwa 2030 agenda will also be fighting to make sure that Zanu PF will not get away with rigging 2028. The truth of the matter is you cannot chase the two birds. You have to pick and choose. If you chase the ED 2030 agenda and the regime near at the time dumps it, because Mnangagwa himself is on record saying he's a constitutionalist. He's not interested in he's not interested in staying on beyond his stipulated term limit. If he was to pull out a few months before the elections, say end of next year, because the party has apparently given its legal department until next year to find a way out, to find a way of implementing this resolution number 1. So at this next conference next year, the party may well report that they found a way And this is how they want to do it. And if Mnangagwa was to turn around and say, no, I'm not interested in staying on, the nation would have lost a year of educating those MDC, CCC, Chete brigade members that participating in these flawed elections is foolish. If he was to string the nation along and say, yeah, the party should go ahead, initiate those amendments or whatever it is, it could take another year, 2027, to explore those possibilities. And the nation will be fighting to try to stop him. At the end of 2027, Mnangagwa can still turn around and say, no, I'm not interested in staying on. And then the country will have lost 2 years. And by then, they will have only 1 year to really focus on the task on hand of telling these MDC Chete brigade members that participating in flawed elections is foolish. They may not be able to achieve that, particularly if the opposition had mobilized around this so-called ED2030 agenda. Because even if, for the sake of argument, Zanu PF was to go ahead and do whatever they have to do and get Mnangagwa to stay on beyond 2028. So in other words, come the elections in 2028, it will only be parliamentary elections and council elections. The presidential elections will be off. If Zanu PF was to win those parliamentary elections, there is nothing the country can do to stop Mnangagwa continuing beyond 2028. However, if the nation had been focusing on this issue of making sure that Zanu PF can rig elections but not get away with it, and so Zanu PF fails to get away with rigging 2028, what will happen then is that Zanu PF will be forced to go into a new GNU arrangement. And a Zanu PF party that has lost legitimacy because the parliamentary election process was condemned cannot impose whatever decision they had made regarding the presidency. In other words, an imposed president cannot be part of the GNU. And so it will be pointless. Whatever decision they had made regarding Mnangagwa himself would be irrelevant because they cannot carry him through into the GNU. The number one thing we want to achieve is make sure that Zanu PF does not rig 2028 parliamentary elections and get away with it. Yes, we may achieve the same thing also if the parliamentary and presidential and local elections go ahead in 2028. But even if they took off the presidential, it doesn't matter It's the parliamentary that will matter. Deny Zanu PF political legitimacy, and Zanu PF dictatorship will collapse. And whoever is the dictator at the time, they will not be able to carry on. That is the argument. So I'd like to go back to the original statement. What is a rational Zimbabwean political plan for the next 3 years? My answer was to make sure that we do not have another rigged election, or at the very least, Zanu PF does not get away with another rigged election. Stopping Zanu PF rigging the election is impossible. So what we can realistically do is make sure that Zanu PF does not get away with another rigged election. That is the realistic goal. And our plan A is to make sure we educate the electorate, notably the Chamisa Chete Brigade members, that the opposition are corrupt, incompetent, and worst of all, they are liars. And they've been conning the nation to participate in flawed elections. Convincing the Chamisa Chete Brigade is not going to be easy because these individuals are not rational. They've been conned so many times, and yet they still believed these lies. And yet, it must be said, it's not impossible either. Because even some of the most hard-boiled Chamisa Chete Brigade members cannot deny that Chamisa told them last time that he had plugged the vote rigging loopholes to stop Zanu PF rigging elections. They cannot deny that Zanu PF did rig the elections. The very thing Chamisa said will not happen. Those are hard historic facts that they cannot run away from. I think we have a plan. Plan A should focus on educating the Zimbabwe electorate, most notably the Chamisa Chete Brigade members of the 40 of participating in flawed elections, only to give Zanu PF legitimacy and perpetuate the nation's suffering. We have to be on the lookout for those who would want to pursue this ED2030 agenda and forget about the issue of educating the voters. We have to confront those people and tell them with no uncertain, with the force and conviction that the issue deserves. That whether ED gets the amendment that he wants or he doesn't, the truth of the matter is if Zanu PF fails to get away with another rigged election in 2028, they will not get away with imposing a Zanu PF dictator. It is a complex plan, but I would like to reiterate the point here that one of the problems why we are in this mess is that sometimes Zimbabweans have looked for the easy solutions. My argument with them would be to say sometimes life is complicated. We should not always be looking for the easy solutions because they're not always easy solutions in this world. Understanding that Chamisa lied when he said he plugged the vote-rigging loopholes. It's not rocket science. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. That is fairly straightforward. And in this argument, I am only asking you to believe what the facts are speaking for themselves, the historic facts. Chamisa did lie that he had plugged the vote-rigging loopholes. And 2 million were conned to participate in the flawed elections in 2023. And by participating, they gave Zanu PF legitimacy. And thus perpetuating the nation's suffering. Those are facts, and they're not that complicated. Why somebody with 11 years of formal education should struggle to understand and come to the conclusion that Chamisa conned them beggars belief. Chamisa must not be allowed to con the nation again in 2028. Because if he does, then Zanu PF will rig 2028 elections and get away with it. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.